2 years ago, we studied chapters 1 through 14. We did Exodus last year, and we'll do Acts this year, 15 through 28. Janine has been working on the questions for them. She makes them fun. I try to make the class fun, not funny. There's a difference between funny and fun. I want the class to be fun. I want them to love to learn, to make it as interesting as it possibly can be. And I have no end to puzzles and ways that you can learn, things that I learned when I was teaching at Schultz Lewis, because we taught a lot of special needs kids, and you had to know how to really hold their attention, especially when they were diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, all the things on the spectrum, dealing with things like Asperger. And so you had to really know how to check yourself in dealing with kids. These kids here in Traverse City, these young adults and children, fabulous learners. And we have had in the years since I've been working with the kids in Bible Bowl, there's only been one other student of all of northern Michigan that had a perfect score. The rest of the perfect scores have all been by our students here, and they study even outside of class. So I'm very pleased with that, and so looking forward to it. I have the list of sermons. Greg had mentioned that I was going to work that into the theme, Send Me. And I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised and amazed at all that is implied and given to us as directions to send me, which typically the first thing that comes in our mind when it says send me is, oh, I've got to go to some faraway place, or I've got to do all this hard work, and I've got to do things that I'm not really comfortable with. But you are going to be amazed at the different aspects of send me. And send me is as simple sometimes as, oh, you put me in charge of raising my children? Send me. Oh, you've called me to go halfway around the world to be an evangelist? Send me. You've called me to do this, you called me to do that. So there's a lot of things that are implied into that we're going to look into, and it's going to take quite a while. I have the first 13 lessons. Next Sunday's lesson is the year of the Lord's favor. It talks about the year of Jubilee, and Jesus said, I'm here to proclaim that. The second one is I'm actually going to get into that directive, whom shall I send, in Isaiah 6:8. And Isaiah said, send me. Here am I, send me. Ephesians chapter 4:12 and January 21st, equipping the saints, and then the 28th, visiting the brothers. So the list for the sermons is always on the bulletin board right next to the kitchen. I post these the quarter ahead of time so that you'll see it. There's also the search program. All the lessons for the month for the search program are always posted there. I think it is one of the better, if not maybe the best program going today. Phil Sanders is an excellent teacher. Does a wonderful job of giving the basics of what people need to know. So what do you need to know? What questions do you need to ask now that it's December 31st that you cannot wait for because it's the end of the year? You needed to know that before the end of the year. What do you need to know? And I'm asking you. I don't have the answer, only you have the answer. What questions have been lurking in your mind the whole year that you think, I've been dying to know this, and he has not covered it? Why does God, next question? Why does God allow bad things to happen? Why does God allow us to do bad things? That's really the question. Free will. Not free willy, but free will. Why does God allow people to drink alcohol and get in a car and drive? Whose choice was that? It's the person, it's the individual. Now, when we get to why do children suffer with leukemia? Why do I see these commercials for St. Jude's Hospital with all of these children suffering from all manner of disease? Well, let's go back to the book of Genesis. Whose choice was it to take of the forbidden fruit from the tree? Mm-hmm.
Choice. And I don't believe God will interfere with anything we choose to do unless we ask Him into our lives to interfere to help us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There are many things that have been set in motion that we just don't know what awaits us, even on our way back home today. We have no idea what awaits. But there's another side to that question. Why did bad things happen to me when I was a child? Brianna, you're going to answer that question, aren't you? Or you had another one?
No, I had an answer to what you said.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I believe bad things happen to us to draw us closer to God.
Oh, there was my answer right there. She got it. Yes. There's an aspect of when bad things happen to us. There's this guy named Job. There's this guy named Job who did not ask for it, did he? Did you ever read the last 2 or 3 verses of the book of Job? I did, because that was the last reading for the year. Is that God gave him twice as much and allowed him to live 140 years more in his life. We don't want, well, I make that statement. Does anybody here want bad things to happen to them? I'm waiting for one hand. One person is going to be oppositional and say, I want bad things to happen to me. If they draw us closer to God. But we don't know the end of it. Just as Job and his 3 friends did not know what was going to come out of this. They assumed. What did they assume about Job? He did something. Job, it's your fault. Because even people who don't believe in God and are doubters will say, why did God allow that? Well, wait a minute, I didn't think you believed in God. How can your God, well, I thought you didn't believe in God. Every time that circle will come back. I don't have the answer to every question, other than to say that all things are in God's hands. And even though these little placards, how many of you have seen the little ones that people will put in the sign, just like a yard sale sign, those type, that said, God's got it? You guys seen that one? You will. I'll tell you this today. You will see it within the next couple of days. You say, oh, he talked about that. Do I believe God's got it? Yeah. I'm not necessarily a fan of that particular line of thinking. Because if I say, well, God's got it, that means I'm just going to do whatever I want because God's got this. Well, there is a time for us to roll up our sleeves and make things better in this world. I believe that's what we've been called to. Number 1, through the gospel, but number 2, by helping those who are in need. Now, Darcy, that has not answered your question, has it?
Well, I'm studying with somebody right now that did 2 tours in Iraq.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, here's what I'll ask for another vote. How many of you understand why God does things? One hand? You see, we don't. In Deuteronomy 29:29 says the secret things belong to who? But the things that he wants us to know, he has written down for our instruction. Paraphrased loosely, but look it up. The secret things belong to God. The secret things of everything that went on in Job's life belonged to God. And one of my favorite passages is when God begins and asks, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? And he goes on with question after question after question, saying, you just don't know. You don't know. Why is it that a bad thing happened to me as a child? Why was it? As a child, I probably didn't tell you this, you didn't know it. I spent an awful lot of time sick when I was a kid. In bed, in hospitals, not long-term hospitals, but I was in the hospital many times when I was a kid. And so I spent a lot of time reading encyclopedias and dictionaries. Can you believe that? Would you have believed that about me? And did I want to be sick as a child? But some of those ways that I learned to study paid off in the long run for me. Now, did I say God made me sick so I would learn how to read and study? No, I don't believe that was it. I was sick all those times because my parents wouldn't take me and get a tube put in my ear so it would drain it. And they wouldn't have my tonsils out. That's the long and short of that. Not that they didn't want to, they just didn't know any better. But there are things that happen to us that we don't learn to appreciate. And I've heard people that are paraplegics and quadriplegics, I've heard them give motivational talks. Now, do you think they are bitter, or do you think they have learned how to see the good in life? Which one do you think? They've learned to see the good in life. Did they want to become a paraplegic or quadriplegic? No. But that is the lot that they have been given in life, and they have made the best of it. And so, if I've got to talk about my hangnails and my paper cuts one more time, because I have lived a blessed life. I have lived a life of good health beyond what I can possibly imagine. And next week, when I get really sick, do you think I'm going to be happy about it? No, I'm not, because I'm going to say, why do I have to be sick? Because that's the human nature. Do I begrudge people who are sick? No, because I have no idea what they're really going through. I really don't. Should we blame God for all of the misfortunes in the world? No. Yeah, who are we? We have created many of those. But it's not enough to lay the blame on someone. Because if there's one thing that we want to do in this world, is we want to blame and we want to criticize people. And if you don't believe it, go to any social media page and read the comments after someone who's given a magnificent testimonial about the possibilities of life. And someone will rip them to shreds, won't they? That's human nature. We just feel the need to have to tear things down. And as we are on the last day, and after today, we don't have to be thankful or grateful anymore, do we? We spent an entire year being thankful and grateful for everything in life. And did you think your list was ever going to end of things you were thankful and grateful for? You began to be grateful and thankful for things you never realized that you could be grateful and thankful, up to and including the bad things that happened. Your car didn't start. You had a flat tire. The electricity went out. You had to have this fixed. You had to have that replaced. The list goes on and on. But when you begin to think about the possibilities in every challenge for good, rather than always seeing the darkness in it, it paints a better picture for us. Not because you are, what was this fictional character's name? What was her name? Always had pigtails. She was Pollyanna. It's not because we are a Pollyanna, that we have blinders and we don't see anything but good. Yep. Anybody doubt that there's bad in this world? There is. Make no mistake about it. And there are people that are suffering who we cannot imagine why they are suffering. And it may be that in this coming year, as we see that theme, did you decide which picture you're going to use, Greg?
Yeah, I sent it to you.
Okay, you sent me two of them. Was one was the banner and one was more square?
Well, we got both.
Okay, yeah,
We utilize vertically or horizontally.
got it. Okay, now I understand. I'm a little slow in this. But in the coming year, when you say, oh, send me, who knows? I don't want to preach to the choir or give away too much for this year, but in the coming year when it says send me, who knows that you are not called to help ease someone's pain who cannot figure out why it is that bad things are happening? Why does God allow this suffering? And for those people that, I've often thought this about the people that are coming back or who have come back from Afghanistan and Iran, those people that are dealing with the horrors, absolute horrors of war in Palestine right now, and those who are going through the civil wars in Africa and the Ukraine, and the list keeps going on and on of what they are going through. But how are we going to deal with the magnitude of that suffering in this world? And the answer is? Too big for us? God. The sticker that, how many of you have seen the sticker that says more Jesus on cars? You know who told me about this bumper sticker? Tim Tate. He told me about that sticker, and within a couple days, I thought, they were everywhere. I just didn't realize they were everywhere. More Jesus. Did that answer your question, Darcy? And maybe the question turned back to him is, after all this is done, how will you help people that are suffering in this world? That's too easy sometimes. But one day he may be the help that someone needs who is suffering in unbelievable ways. Any other questions we need to answer before this year is over? I'm not letting you get out of it this easy. 3 books left in the Old Testament. Haggai, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Haggai, as we looked at, that was the last one we looked at in chapter 2 and verse 6. If you open to the New Testament and then just flip back 3 books to Haggai. Haggai chapter 2 and verse 6, where Haggai says, yet once more in a little while I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. And when Haggai wrote this, of course, he probably had in mind that he was talking about a certain situation. But Paul, the writer of the book of Hebrews says, at that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. So the writer of the book of Hebrews identifies that. That's the one we left at. And now we're in the book of Zechariah. And Zechariah is the next to last book in the Old Testament, but it is, as near as we can tell, is the next to last book that was written before what they called that period of silence. But it really wasn't a period of silence. Those 400 years, a lot of things were going that God had talked about and he had revealed to Daniel, and they upset Daniel so much that it says, I couldn't get out of bed for 3 weeks. I'm paraphrasing that, but for 3 weeks he was troubled by this because he saw everything that was going on in these visions. But God was preparing through all of this, and I'm going to dip just a little bit back in time as we talk about the 4 kingdoms that Daniel talked about. And the Israel and the Jews could not imagine why all these bad things were going to happen to them. They were sent away into the Babylonian captivity. And do you know what came out of the Babylonian captivity that prepared the gospel to be preached 600 years later? The synagogue. That's where synagogues came from, is the captivity. Because at that time, the only place that people could go to worship was the temple. Once they went into exile, they had to have a place to where they could gather together and keep the religion going. So they developed these little places called synagogues. And so for the next 100 years, as these synagogues began to pop up all over, not only to the east in Babylon and Assyria, but also up into where Paul makes his journeys in the book of Acts, up into what's modern-day Turkey, as he goes all the way, all of these far-flung, that's a Greek term, far-flung places. How would the gospel have been effectively preached had it not been for the synagogues? Blessing that came out of that. The next thing we look at is, how is the gospel going to be preached in a land to where wars are and lawless nations are living? Well, during the Medo-Persian Empire, they developed this thing called universal laws. And they can go on this cylinder, and they can look to where they wrote the laws. We take it for granted that we have laws that says just ooze through a stop sign. No, stop at a stop sign. We live in a land of laws. Think about it, until that time, there were no universal laws. It was a tribal situation to where one law was good here, one law. They began to establish this thing called laws in the Medo-Persian Empire. They'd started it under others, but it really gained speed in that. So as these laws were developed, it eventually comes to the Roman Empire, which is known as the Pax Romana. Does anybody know what Pax means? P-A-X? It means peace. The peace of Rome. God was developing a time to where the gospel could be spread in peace. Imagine if they were trying to spread the gospel to where there were nothing but civil wars going on. We don't realize how much peace there was going on in the Roman Empire. Sure, they had their skirmishes, but from all the way well east of Palestine to Spain and England, there was peace. You dare not mess with a Roman citizen. If you did unlawfully, it was your life, even if you put them in chains. Now we begin to understand why Paul says, is it lawful for you to beat a Roman citizen uncondemned? Three times he used the law of Rome. So we have not only synagogues, we not only have laws, but does anybody know what language the New Testament was written in? We have a universal language that Paul, being a citizen of Tarsus, but also from Palestine, travels hundreds of miles, thousands, well, not thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of miles, walks into a synagogue, and guess what language they're speaking? Close enough. They're speaking Koine, the common Greek, in that. Not only that, but do you know what they had developed by the time we got into the Roman Empire? This system called roads. Some of those roads, do you know, are still used today that they drive on? We need to send, no, I'm not going to condemn because I think our highway system today is second to none. I think it's one of the wonders of the world is our interstate highway system. You may not think that come spring when the potholes are there, but all of these things God was developing with one thought in mind. I'm going to take the gospel, the good news, to the people, using a common language, a place to where laws are obeyed, a place to where I have synagogues that they can take this to my chosen people, the Jews, and a road system to travel on. Imagine that. So, did I see a hand up? God has all of these things in mind for this. We get to the book of Zechariah, and Zechariah and Malachi are written very close to each other. And Zechariah has a lot to say about the coming kingdom, the Messiah. Let's see. I have a couple of these that I have circled. Turn to chapter 9, if you would please, of Zechariah, next to last book in the Old Testament. And Zechariah is going to write a lot about the archangel. He's going to write a lot about the high priest. All of these things are going to be established really in a symbolic way. But he comes down to Zechariah chapter 9 and verse 9. He says, "Rejoice, O greatly." Pardon me? Zechariah 9, verse 9. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." I have the date written here that this is 520 BC, before Christ. Nowadays, when you see in the language used to identify timestamps, it's called the BCE, before the Common Era. They're getting away from calling it before Christ or Anno Domino, or in the modern era, in the Common Era. But here, BC, 520 BC, Zechariah writes this, and how does this show up fulfilled in the New Testament? Jack, you're probably going to talk about this eventually, but I just wanted to point out in the Old Testament where these are found. Anybody recognize this? The triumphal entry. The triumphal entry of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, where he sends his disciples, says, "I want you to go get this colt, a horse and a colt on which no one has ever ridden." Anybody ever ridden a horse for the first time? I mean, you think, I just wondered this, of putting someone on a horse for the first time, a horse had never been ridden. He says, "I want you to go get this, and if they ask you, tell them the Savior needs it." So here it is, fulfilled here. Now, and sort of a side note to that, if you went back to Exodus chapter 12, I believe, and they're giving the directions to those people who are still in Egypt, and they're about to go out on out of Egypt, but they have to get this Passover lamb. The Passover lamb is to be gotten on the 10th day of the month, the month of Nisan, not the car, but the month, the first month, on the 10th day, and you had to watch over this lamb for 5 days. And on the 5th day, after you've made sure that it had no blemishes, no broken bones, nothing like this, then you were to slay the Passover lamb. Jesus presents himself for their viewing 5 days before he is crucified. And we look, and you have to look at all 4 Gospels, and you have to piece them together. But you can see that Jesus presents himself here to his city, Jerusalem, for examination. And it says he was going in and out of the gates daily, teaching in the temple. The first time he goes in there on that day, what does he do? He clears the temple. Turns over the money changer, and then on the 5th day, we are told that Jesus is our Passover lamb. And this is the passage here that talks about that humble and mounted on a donkey. Why would it tell us that your king is coming humble, mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey? What is it in this that describes, what is the description being presented to us here? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mike, what did you say?
Lower class, transportation type thing.
And what did you say? Oh, as he's coming in, what would you expect a king to come into his city? What would it look like, a king? It would be with all of the grandeur. The child who is to be the heir apparent of a king, and we can see this even in our day, and I get this mixed up. Is it Harry or William that's the heir apparent today? It's William, okay. I know this all, but I forget. I always get the names mixed up. When he was born into the world, it was unclear as to whether Charles was, if his mom was going to outlive him or he was going to outlive his mom. But when that child comes in, there is great pomp when a child who's going to be heir apparent to the crown is born. Just like when Jesus came into the world, wasn't it? We make a big deal about it now. Look at what we have to celebrate his birth today, all of the lights and everything. But not so then. A king? As my mother reminded me and asked me that question so often when I was a child, were you born in a barn? Did your parents ask you that? I'd come in and I wouldn't close it. Were you born in a barn? Well, I knew somebody who was. But nothing about him, and when you read Isaiah chapter 53, when it said there's nothing really about him that really draws us to him. He wasn't born with pomp and circumstance. He wasn't born with fireworks going off. He had to have, and how many of the Magi were there? We don't know. We assume that it's 3 because they had gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We don't know how many they were, but they came from hundreds of miles. As near as we can tell, they came from all the way over on the other side of the Babylonian Empire. Hundreds of miles, and the people who were expecting, who knew that their Savior was going to be born at a time, because you can go back to the book of Daniel and you can see the timeline it was told you in those 7 weeks. It was defined right to the exact year from the date of the ordering of the rebuilding of the temple. From then, the number of years they could have told exactly when, where, and how, and who. They knew that. But it took these magi coming from hundreds of miles away to say, that's your king. Even Herod didn't know it. Diane?
How did the Magi know?
How did they know? They said they'd been following a star.
All those years?
We don't know exactly how long they had been traveling, but it could very well have been months and months, maybe a year or two. They had followed this star. We've followed this star, is what they had seen. I've heard scholars talk about this in that it may have been that they were in a place where there was a synagogue. And because they, much in the same way as we read in Acts chapter 17, that they loved nothing more than to sit around talking about the newest thing in town coming about.
Did they travel by night?
By night?
I mean, the stars are out at night. We don't see them during the day.
If I were traveling through a desert, what time do you think I would travel? Yeah, but it could have been early in the morning and then late at night, that same star could have been. But it would have been unusual. The star would have been unusual because when I go to bed at night, did I ever tell you I love to go out and look at stars? At different times of the year, when I am looking, and this is east, isn't it? And if that's east, that's north. And I can look up and see the North Star, Polaris. And I see this star that comes up here. And if I sit out at night and watch the fire, and Janine can verify this, that I go out a lot of times and just stare at the fire for no reason, apparently. And I watch that star come up. They knew that the things rotated around. At that time, they believe it was Sirius the dog star, but now it's Polaris for us. They knew that there's a rotation. But if that star is always at the same spot, what does that tell you? Yes, it would have been something very curious for them. We don't know what it was, but it was apparently enough to draw their attention. And it may have been that in a synagogue, they had heard these prophecies told because they would have listened to these prophets teaching this. And they would have said, oh, something's going to come one day. And
Did the prophets talk about the star?
they would not have talked about the star, but they would have talked about the other things that surrounded this. Whatever it was about the star was enough for these, some people believe they were Zoroastrian monks, priests, the Magi, or Magi, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But it was a certain sect in that area. They brought gifts for a king, exactly. And this king, not only in his birth, but close to his death, was in a position here coming in, and I know we got to finish this in just a minute, but it says, humble and mounted on a donkey, a colt, a foal of a donkey. And you look at the way that he was greeted by the common people, and as they came in and they were throwing down palm branches, and they threw their articles of clothing on there so he'd have something to sit. It was very grandeur-esque, grandiose. I'm trying to think of the right word here. You know what I'm talking about. And yet when the officials of the Jews saw this, what did they say? Tell them to stop this. They didn't even recognize their king. And Jesus says, I tell you the truth, if they stop, what would happen? Even the stones would cry out. Even the stones would have recognized that their king, the king of the earth, the king of creation who spoke everything into being, they would recognize it, but you didn't. They were expecting a king. A fancy king. Yeah.
They should have known the scriptures.
They should have known the scriptures. Fortunately, we all know the scriptures, don't we? We would never be caught like that. Okay. And the last one, and so quickly, Malachi, an unusual one in Malachi chapter 1 and verse 2 says, yet I have loved Jacob, but Esau I've hated. Have you ever wondered about that verse? How can you tell if a parent loves their child or hates their child? How they treat them. Jacob I love because Jacob I disciplined. Israel I disciplined. My chosen people I disciplined. But Esau was an Edomite, and the prophecy of old from them is he would be like a wild donkey, untrained. Jacob I love because I disciplined. I did not discipline Esau, which is the same thing as saying, and we know that. What kind of parent does not discipline their child? A parent that doesn't love them. Even Solomon said that. He that does not discipline his child hateth his child. He who spares the rod hateth his child. How did God show his hatred for Esau? He did not discipline Esau, but he disciplined Jacob. That's how he knew he was loved. Okay. So much in there. Jack, you'll cover all this next year, right?